Hello, this is Genevieve Fontana coming to you from Canisius University in Buffalo, New York, and you are listening to the Did You Know podcast. You might not know it, but we have eco-heroines around our campus working to make it sustainable for future generations. For each show, I will spotlight earth-friendly initiatives and sit down with the changemakers of our institution. Today, we are spotlighting Kevin Gavin, Adjunct Professor of Management and Marketing at Canisius University. He is a retired store manager for JCPenny, where he worked for 30 years. Professor Gavin has a unique perspective on the institution as an alum for both undergraduate and grad, and also a dedicated member of LATOC. Thank you so much for being part of this project and speaking with me today.
Thank you so much, Genevieve. It's a pleasure to be here.
I'm so glad that we got to talk.
Absolutely.
So would you be able to introduce yourself and explain a little bit about what you do at Canisius?
Absolutely. So my name is Kevin Gavin, as you mentioned, and I'm relatively new as far as adjunct. I've taught 3 semesters, and as an adjunct, I teach when they need me. So some semesters I teach, some semesters I don't. And what I do is I work within the management and marketing department. So my main course I teach is Management 101, which is Introduction to Management. I've had 27 years of management experience, so it brings an interesting perspective. It's not just what I learned in school when I went here as an undergrad, but it's also everything I did as far as working for a Fortune 500 company for 30 years. So it gives a kind of a different perspective to management because I've actually been in the trenches and had to make those changes and tough decisions.
Definitely, and I think it's so interesting, and I appreciate how involved you are even when you're not working every semester and everything.
Oh, absolutely. I'm very passionate about the environment. And as a matter of fact, when I worked for the JCPenny company, I was on the green team. I was the field representative of the green team for the national company. Wow. Which was really exciting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then what does your role entail as an adjunct professor of management and marketing at Canisius University?
So depending on what I'm teaching, my main course I teach is Introduction to Management. So normally I have 34 or 35 students, and we work through and we take them from the basics of business. How does a business operate? Everything from a basic business all the way to a multinational corporation. And we go through and we study, and many of these students have not had background in business, so we take and go through the very basics, and we talk about how a business may grow from a farm stand, from being at a farmer's market, all the way to being a major corporation. Mm-hmm. And we go through, and then once we establish the basics of business, we then go through and look at how does management change the world? And in effect, management changes the world. And we go through, and one of the big projects that we do is we take a look at big companies that failed, and we look at what went wrong.
Oh, cool.
How did companies go from being one of the largest in the country to completely disappearing?
Yeah.
And we go through and look at the level of poor decisions that have been made and things that happen that change the entire environment for the company, but also influence the community and their employees.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a fun project. I really want the students to learn how and be able to analyze a company and not just say, oh, it's too bad they're running out of business.
Yeah.
But instead say, what happened? What's next? How could this have been averted? How could they have changed with their customer? How could they have changed with the environment as technology changes?
Yeah, I think that's so interesting, especially when you're talking starting from a farm stand or something so small, because especially now people's values are more into small businesses and environmental-based things, so that's definitely how something could grow.
Oh, absolutely. And so many of our large corporations started with filling an unmet need. And so often the consumer did not even realize that they needed that product, which is interesting. When you really look at companies, we studied 3 companies, and we look at, we look at Nike or Nike, depending on how you pronounce it, and how it started and how it really came from people having discomfort when they ran, and actual pain and foot injuries from running in uncomfortable shoes, like running in Converse sneakers, because that's what the current technology was.
Right.
And people didn't even realize it. They knew that if they wanted to run, they had to be in pain. But the reality is they had the founder had a vision for running in comfort, and then actually used a waffle maker to get the first sole.
Wow.
To create the first sole, to give cushion when you run, and to structure and to support the foot, and to increase speed, and all these things, because it was an unmet need. People didn't even know they wanted more comfortable sneakers.
Yeah.
They knew that they enjoyed running, but they enjoyed it even more when the technology changed with them.
That's so interesting.
It's fun, but there's so many companies like that. Yeah. We go through and we study 3 companies like that, and we look at how the customer doesn't even know they want it, but then when they realize it, they're like, wow, this is perfect. This is what I need.
Yeah. Especially with Converse, so my grandparents, when I got Converse, because I liked the way they looked, they were like, oh, you're wearing gym shoes, which is funny, that you said that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Even when I was in school, when we would have gym, we would have those uncomfortable sneakers. And
Yeah.
can you imagine running a marathon in those?
Yeah, no, I cannot. So flat.
Oh my goodness. There's no support.
Yeah.
They're flat. You know, when you sweat, they get wet.
Mm-hmm.
You know, everything that could go wrong. But that's what athletes had to do. And if you look at old films of the Olympics and runners back in the day, that's the shoes they were wearing.
Yeah, that's nice.
And it's crazy. But it took somebody to be able to realize that consumers don't even know they want this, and all of a sudden it radically changed the world.
Right.
And people enjoy sports more, and they would participate more because they're in less pain.
Yeah, no, I can't imagine, like, especially like the Olympics now, people with Converse on.
Absolutely. And it's really crazy, but that's even like old-fashioned basketball sneakers, the Converse that were originally the Chuck Taylors.
That's what my grandparents were saying. Oh, you're wearing basketball sneakers.
Exactly,
like,
exactly.
Yeah.
And it's so funny because we're so accustomed to them being a fashion.
Mm-hmm.
Now, do you know that Converse is owned by Nike or Nike?
I think I've heard of that before, yeah.
They maintain a separate headquarters so that the way the product innovation is kept different from the Nike product.
Yeah, that's so interesting.
Yeah, so I try to keep the course interesting, and I try to get them to make the connections that business doesn't have to be boring, but instead it affects everybody's life and happiness.
And it hits so close to home too because, I don't know, like styles keep coming back, especially with like how big Chuck Taylors or Converse were like then and now and everything like that.
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
Absolutely. And it's funny because now they come in colors. Years ago, they came in 3 basic colors.
Yeah.
What color do you have?
A green one. Like the dark green one.
Right.
Yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah.
But now it's a fashion thing. And then they have limited, they have relationships with artists and creative people that do all these unusual designs and things like that.
Yeah.
But years ago, it came in, I think it was black, white, and red, maybe, or black, white, and navy. Probably early was probably black, white, and navy. So, but it's all about how it changes and adding creativity to a product. And now people wear them for weightlifting because it connects you to the ground better.
Wow.
Do you know what I'm saying? Because as opposed to like a runner, and it also probably protects your feet a little more. So, yeah.
Yeah, we were working with Stitch Buffalo, which is really close to around here.
Right.
And they have a special where they help you embroider your Converse and stuff like that, which is kind of cool.
That's super cool.
Yeah.
Because the customization. Nobody's going to have that same look, and it's going to make it special for you.
Yeah, definitely.
Oh, I love it.
So as a dedicated member of LATOC, what does the initiative mean to you, and where do you see this journey taking Canisius?
Sure. I think one of the biggest things that I like about participating in this committee is that it allows us to take a look at where we are currently and how can we make Canisius University even better, more earth-friendly, bring consciousness of green initiatives to the next generation of leaders. Because it's so important, because so often, it seems like I can't do my part. I'm just an individual. What can I do? And the people do not realize the power of an individual. And when I say that, I talk about, like for example, a water bottle. If you use a plastic disposable water bottle and you use 2 or 3 per day, not only are you making a financial investment, but it's also bad for the environment. Whereas if you use a reusable bottle, okay, and I'll just use a rough example. So if you use 3 water bottles disposable per day, and they're $1 each, which they wouldn't be, okay, that would be over $90 per month that you're spending on water bottles.
Yeah.
And it's also bad for the environment. So by that one individual, you do the multiplication of it, and it's amazing how much of the impact the consumer can have on, first of all, their pocketbook and how much they're saving, but also how much they're saving on the environment. And they're reusing that bottle, and they're saving a lot of money, and it's also better for the environment.
Definitely.
So it's kind of one of those things that I think is great, because that people will take that from Canisius University and it'll impact their life.
Yeah.
Because it's, the easier thing is, I'm going to grab a bottle of water. And you don't always think of the cost of that. And all of a sudden, most people, if you said, you're spending almost $100 a month on water, they'd be like, no, I'm not. And
like, definitely not. That doesn't even like equate, kind of like just thinking about the unit price. Yeah.
Exactly. And that's conservative, because as you know, it can be 2 and 3, and sometimes if you're at an event at a stadium, it could be 6 or more.
Oh my gosh, definitely. Like at the Bills games, they give out those huge bottles. I don't know if they're Kind or something like that, but yeah, they're definitely so much more pricey.
Absolutely. And the interesting thing is that category did not even exist when I was in college. That category of water bottles did not even exist. Occasionally, fancy people would have Perrier water, imported from France. But the reality is most people, that was not even on their radar. They would use drinking fountains, or you might drink pop or something like that. But the reality is that category didn't exist. So it's kind of interesting when you look at it.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, even the bottle bill for New York State, which which is where they have a deposit on the each bottle that's sold, a pop and beer and things. So that did not even include water bottles, because in 1982, when that bill was developed, in 1981, that bill, water bottles didn't even exist.
Wow.
So it's just interesting how it changes throughout. The product didn't even exist back in the 1980s, in effect.
I saw recently how they were trying to change the return amount on the bottle, because it really doesn't matter as much now with all of our prices increasing.
100%.
It's not as rewarding.
100%. And so, for example, when that first went out in the early 80s, a nickel meant something.
Yeah.
And now politicians are afraid to change that because, it'll be perceived as a tax. But it's a completely rebatable thing. Mm-hmm. And by doing the financial incentive, you're actually providing the consumer an incentive to recycle.
Yeah.
And to take them back to be recycled at the store or at one of these bottle return places. And there's an economic incentive for them to do that. And what happens is they're afraid to change it. But the reality is a nickel, one time I looked at it was maybe 2 years ago, and it had increased to 13 cents. Oh. What would be equivalent today. So if you were, if you had a quarter on each bottle, you're probably more likely to just return it than throwing it in the trash.
Yeah. And
those are the kind of things that we need to change. And then there's also categories of beverages that didn't exist. Like I mentioned, water, they did adjust the bottle bill, but there's like cider was not even an issue back and that's a growing category.
Yeah.
Sports beverages like Gatorade, Powerade, all that did not exist, or in limited forms. So all those things change, but it does increase the percent that people recycle rather than just doing it in curbside.
I know now, like Chartwell's is doing the bottle return thing, and then when you bring, I think they had to increase it to 20 now, but it used to be 10 bottles and you get a free beverage. And that was so, it was such an incentive for students. They would bring so many bottles back, at the end of the week.
Absolutely.
In order to get their drink at the market.
Oh, it's huge.
Yeah.
It's huge. And that provides the financial incentive. The other thing that's really good from I call a reverse logistics perspective, reverse logistics being, it's good to say recycle, but how does it then turn into a usable product?
Yeah.
So by the reverse logistics is they return to the store. It has a higher recycle rate with stores that have or with states that have a deposit, but it also has a higher percent of ability to be recycled because you're not having contaminated recycles. Yeah. So therefore there will be a market for aluminum, and sometimes there'll be a market for plastic in a pure form, and glass the same way. Whereas if it's all mixed together, it's kind of questionable whether it will be recycled.
Yeah, and it's so confusing. I mean, I don't think that the system is perfect, definitely, because of the different numbers on the bottom of the plastic.
Absolutely.
Because, a 1 could be reused again, but as you get farther down to the 5, 6, 7, which is definitely used more in our packaging, it's hard to
absolutely
reuse that or find somewhere to recycle that.
Absolutely. Yeah. And what's interesting with that is from a business perspective, you have to create a market where there's an incentive for people to recycle. So in other words, not only for the people to put it physically to the store or at the curbside bin, but also a market for those products.
Yeah.
One of the earliest categories of recycle was corrugated cardboard. Stores would recycle it when they would unpack their boxes, and then they would send it back to be recycled because there was a market to purchase that reused cardboard because it was cheaper than actually harvesting new trees and making, so the cardboard had a market. People would actually earn, some big companies, my company would earn millions of dollars by returning their cardboard.
Wow.
I mean, that's a great thing. And it also is good for the earth because you're not ripping trees down.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? For the new cardboard. And there's only a certain number of times you can use it because eventually the fibers get too fragile or whatever. Yeah. But the reality is you have to create that aftermarket. So for the example, plastics, when you go into that 5, the yogurt containers are the eternal thing.
Definitely,
Sometimes it's always that agony. Should I recycle it? Should I not recycle it?
Definitely.
Because the 5 is the hardest to find a market for because there's not a product that it's convenient. It's cheaper to create new plastic. But as oil prices might increase, because oil is used in the production of plastic, as you know, that might cause there to create a market for plastics. So, but there has to be a way of developing a market where people will willingly want it. Yeah. Same with paper. Paper can be easily recycled, but there has to be a market for people who will buy the recycled paper. Yeah. And it's all about creating not only to talk about recycling, but to also create a market where it makes business sense to pay for the sorting and the process to convert it. Aluminum is a great, very easy item to recycle because aluminum, it's cheaper to use recycled than it is to harvest. To get new, create new aluminum products.
Yeah, definitely.
So it's a very interesting thing, and it's a lot of study, and there's a whole thing called packaging engineering that specializes in how do you create more sustainable lifestyle with packaging.
Right.
And how do we create packaging that's more efficient? And so often you buy something and it seems giant, and then when you open it up,
it's the tiniest thing.
Exactly.
One of my friends sent me a picture this week when they were buying books from the bookstore. Mm-hmm. They got like the biggest plastic bag ever, and the book was this small on the bottom of the bag.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And how do we reduce that?
Yeah.
Did they even need the bag? First of all, do they need that bag? And then the other thing is there a smaller bag available that's going to use less plastic, or would a paper bag be a better option?
Yeah.
Would it be more environmentally friendly? And it's a very interesting debate. And like, for example, years ago, Ireland, my grandparents were from Ireland. So when I visited, and I was with my cousins, and we were in a small grocery store, and the cashier said, "Oh, do you want to buy a bag?" And I'm like, "Oh," and I was kind of really puzzled because in New York State, you always get your plastic bags free. So I was like, "Oh, okay, I guess." And they all pulled these small reusable bags out of their purses. And they put their stuff in their bag because it would, I don't remember the exact dollar, but it might be equivalent of $1 per bag. Mm-hmm. And they're like, "Oh, we're going to save money by doing it." And their use of bags decreased something like 90% as a country, simply by providing a financial incentive to the consumer and saying, "Oh, do you know what? I can save $1, and if I'm buying my groceries for the week, I might save $5 or $7 by bringing my own bag." So you provide that incentive. To do it. So it's interesting.
Definitely. And that's why I think it's so smart. My parents shop at Aldi a lot. Mm-hmm. And so like the paper bag costs less than the plastic bag costs more. Mm-hmm. It's just all it makes sense in the system.
Oh, absolutely. And Aldi is based in Germany. Yeah. And what's interesting with them is they also provide boxes that would have been thrown out or recycled. You get your box and bring it to you can use the box instead of a bag to carry to your car. Yeah. But it's also interesting. I don't know if you've never noticed. This is something I'm obsessed with. The cashiers sit at Aldi. Yeah. Okay. Have you ever noticed their cash drawer?
Not really.
Okay. I guess, Their money is stacked this way as opposed to flat. Oh. Like they do in Europe.
Oh, that's cool.
It's fascinating. Yeah. But it's the only retailer that I've ever seen where the money is stacked like it is in Ireland and in England and things like that. Yeah. It's kind of cool. So next time if you ever pay cash, you should do it one time just to see if the money is stacked standing up. Okay. Yeah, it's really kind of interesting.
I saw this post on Instagram or something, and it's like how far ahead Aldi is because you really don't need like someone working there, kind of like. So you walk in, you bring your quarter to get the cart, and then you go through, and then at the end, you get your quarter back because you put the cart in the...
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And it's all about efficiency. And their model, and we study their model also in my class, and we talk about how they're different than Wegmans and the service level and things like that, and how they run on such a small staff, and their prices are very low. But you're right with the quarter, that's a great thing. It provides a financial incentive to get that back. Oh, instead of leaving my car where somebody could hit it, or it could possibly, if there's a windstorm or windy day, could hit another car. Mm-hmm. And instead, people are like, "Oh, that's my quarter. I'm going to get it back." Yeah. And it's kind of a neat financial mechanism to prevent damage to the cars, and also for the consumer to take the extra steps and walk it back.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So I know you are a long-term manager of JCPenny. How important is it for large companies to incorporate earth-friendly choices in their business practices?
Well, it's huge, and I will tell you, it's very, like we talked earlier about the financial incentives. It's great,
and the cardboard especially.
And the cardboard especially, and that's something that the Penny Company had done for years, and they were very, very efficient at getting that. We have using that term reverse logistics. So they would have the cardboard, you would wrap it up to be sent back to the warehouse. It would then be picked up by a semi, and it would then be taken to the recycler and sold. And the actual pounds and things like that would actually saved tons of, first of all, dumpster space, and also provided financial revenue. They used to earn literally millions of dollars by recycling cardboard. So they started with that, and then they looked at other means of how do you reduce waste and things like that. So, for example, one of my friends worked in supply chain, and he used to travel internationally. So he was in I think it was in China. It was either China or Hong Kong, I can't remember. And he was at in the Victoria's Secret plant where they make the bras. You know, they would have a large factory. And our bras are made in the same factory. And our brand was Ambrielle, okay, which was a knockoff of Victoria's Secret.
Got it.
So he was watching the production line, and he would see Victoria's Secret bag coming off the line, and they would be put in a package of 12 bras would be put in a plastic bag. And then he watched ours, and every single bra was individually wrapped in plastic. And so he asked the person who worked there, he said, why is there a difference? He said, well, your contract is built that each one gets an individual plastic bag.
Wow, yeah.
And he goes, that's the way your specs are. You know, that's what we have to follow your specs. And he said, well, would it be better if we did it the other way? They said, oh, yeah, well, first of all, you're going to save a ton of money, and it's better for the environment.
Definitely, yeah.
So by making that small little change, save millions of dollars in packaging per year, because this, again, at that point was an $18 billion company, so there was a lot of Ambrielle bras being sold. And by doing that small change, reduce the amount of plastic significantly. And so therefore, it was easier to ship because it was, you know, it was all one thing. They weren't falling all over the place. But by making that small little change, it was huge.
Yeah.
And it's also bringing attention to it. So, for example, we never recycled paper, which was always very odd to me because, you know, we recycle it at home.
Yeah.
So in my store, I was always obsessive about recycling. I came from my mother years ago. Everything had to be recycled. They'd have paper drives and things like that to raise money. And so I started putting recycle bins, and we'd do paper and catalogs and ads and things like that. And then I would take it to a local, you've seen those bitty dumpsters, the bright, colorful ones where they recycle paper. Mm-hmm. You see them in school parking lots and church parking lots a lot.
Yeah.
So we would do that, and I'd do that every week, and I'd fill my car, and I'd have almost a car full of paper by the time of all the ads and things that, you know, magazines and stuff like that. So we'd, put in the recycle bin. So we would have these large store manager meetings in Dallas, and I would always ask questions, and I'd always ask hard questions. So my boss would always be nervous. He's like, oh my God, what's Kevin going to ask? And the reality is that I raise my hand, it's really intimidating because you're in front of 3,000 people.
Oh my gosh.
And you're, at the microphone.
You'd be like...
you're at the microphone. And I said, and I explained what our store did. And I said, we recycle paper. I said, why is the Penny Company not recycling paper? And the CEO, dead silence. And he's like, I have no idea. And the reality is because it was not on their radar, it was not something that they could get a revenue stream from as far as recycling cardboard and things like that. So we said, well, you know what? He goes, we're going to investigate this. Mm-hmm. And that's when I got named to the green team for the company, which was kind of cool.
Awesome, yeah.
And they eventually had a reverse logistics program for paper so that all the paper in the company would be recycled. So we were featured in the green edition of the Earth Day magazine for the company. So it was really cool. Yeah. But the reality is because it was not on their radar, there was not a financial incentive. And they're like, oh, that's a great idea. Why don't we do this? And eventually they added to this program through our feedback from the stores, recycling cans. And we would recycle pop bottles at our store. And we'd have a thing, and then we would take that money and we would donate it to charity. Cool. Every month we'd have a different group that we would contribute to. So it was a fun incentive for the associates to contribute. But all of those things in big companies, it makes it more efficient, profitable. It's good for the environment, good for the customer. Yeah, so, the customer's not going to know whether the bra was packed in 12 or 1, and they don't really care. Yeah, definitely. They want it to be easy to buy, and they don't care about the mint. But by doing those behind the scenes thing, and you look at logistics, sometimes you look at, say, an Amazon, is that truly the most beneficial thing for the environment? Having a truck deliver every single item to a home versus coming to a Wegmans or coming to a JCPenny or coming to a Macy's and delivering it all, and the people, as they need it, go to the store. It's all about what is best for the environment. And then you talk about it, and it's a really interesting thing to study and to look at and see how companies want to make money, obviously, but they also want to be good to the environment. And oftentimes, saving money and being good to the environment are the same thing. Yeah. They're not mutually exclusive. Some people think, oh, I can't afford to be green. Well, the reality is sometimes it makes you more efficient. Mm-hmm. Less plastic that's going to, our plastic also is recycled. So at one point we went from being 75% recycled to 90%, which was very exciting. Yeah. And, and the reality is because you had that reverse logistics set up. So you would have an efficient system. So for example, plastic bags, when they would come off the truck, they would take the plastic off and they would literally drop into a bag of the same plastic. And then therefore, The person didn't have to walk all the way across to remove a garbage can. And those things sound really minor, but those are huge.
No, yeah.
If it's easy for the person to do the work, so the worker would undo it, the plastic, drop it in the bag, and then that would be bundled up and sent back on the truck to our warehouse for reverse logistics. So it's an exciting thing, and it's important for companies to do that and to make it easy for the employees and also or the associates, and also make it easier for customers to recycle.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's so interesting because if your friend didn't go, like, you wouldn't know that your bras were bras were packaged that way, unless
100%.
I mean, I don't know, if you looked like really, really deep into like the contract or whatever. But
exactly. And the thing is they, because they've been doing it for years, and so often we get caught up in the status quo. We've always done it this way. And the reality is, by him visiting that factory and looking, because the Penny's was very, very, for years, they would send inspectors into the factory to make sure that they were, following labor laws, making sure that there was no human trafficking, all that kind of stuff, to make sure that it was a quality product. And they had that for years, and they had people go in. And he just happened to notice, he's like, well, why is ours different than theirs? Because literally they're made in the same place. And they're like, well, that's what your contract says. And the contract had been in place for years. And when they finally looked at it, they're like, oh, by changing the contract, we can be better for the environment and we can be more efficient.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's one of those things, but it's saying business as usual. So by looking at things, like, for example, we talked about packaging. The person who worked in that bookstore probably is used to using that bag because it's probably closer.
Yeah.
Whereas maybe the smaller bags are too far away. Or even simply saying, do you need a bag today? As opposed to automatically giving it to them.
Right.
Because people are like, oh, if she's got a backpack or he's got a backpack, I'll just throw it in my backpack.
Yeah.
Those little things to prevent use. Because when you look at the triangle of reduce, reuse, recycle, we focus a lot on recycle. And with recycle, like we talked about earlier, you have to have that reverse logistics where there's a market for it. It's easy for the consumer to do. And it's also, we have a market to sell that product because you have to take that recycled product somewhere. But you look at the other ones and we talk about reduce. So in other words, by that guy touring the factory, he realized, oh, I can reduce the amount of packaging, and that's great. And even with package design, so often you go in and you buy this giant box of cereal, and it's only like this much.
Yeah.
And
especially more, it's like less and less is in there. Yeah.
Absolutely. And it's kind of a consumer trick to think that, oh, we haven't shrunk the package size. But the reality is they've got to look at it from a cost perspective too. Because some shipping companies will charge you not only based on weight, but they'll also charge you based on the dimensions. Do you know what I mean? So it's an interesting thing. So you want to balance between, you don't want it to look too cheap, but you also want to make sure that the packaging is efficient.
Yeah.
And it's an interesting process too. How do you reduce the waste that you're taking, using in a large company?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Typically, we see conversations about the environment solely as part of the sciences. How have you been able to incorporate it as part of your lessons?
Sure. So what we do is, I especially for Earth Day, we went through and we did the individual consumer and how we talked earlier about the bottle of water. Yeah. And we talked about that, and we do the math, and we do it out to 10 years. And it's a ton of money.
Yeah.
And we look at that, and we look at individual actions. Same with using reusable bags versus using plastic bags or paper bags. How much can you save? And we talk about the impact of the individual. We also talk about it from a consumer perspective, because it's not about what I call greenwashing, where you want to look good to your consumer, but you actually want to make hardcore changes. And we go through and we talk a lot about the reverse logistics, and we talk about the cardboard, and how do you find that aftermarket for that product, and how do you find packaging that is efficient, that not only meets the need of the consumer, that it arrives to the consumer undamaged and unspoiled, but also that there's an aftermarket for that type 5 plastic, that there is something that can be used in a secondary market.
Yeah.
So we talk a lot about that, and we talk about thinking from a new perspective. And that's why we talk about I talked about the innovation earlier with Nike, and talk about how a small thinking outside the box can change the world, and we talk about that. So we tie it in very much into the definitely into the semester.
Yeah.
And we talk about it because these are the future leaders. And it's not just the sciences, but it's everybody. And the reason business is so important is because a lot of the waste that is produced is consumer waste. And it's people that don't recycle. City of Buffalo is trying to get to 34% recycle rate. You've seen the trucks, and they say 34 on the side. They're trying to get to 34.
Oh, okay.
So that means...
I actually haven't seen that.
Oh, you haven't? Oh, okay. I passed one on the way here
today,
and they were picking, and their goal is 34. well, that's a horrible rate of recycle.
That's very minimal.
That means 2/3 of the people are not recycling.
Yeah.
And in so many places, and I'll give you an example, are not set up for it. Like, for example, apartment buildings often don't have recycling available. Some people have had to pack I know people who have packed their recyclables and they take it to their parents' house because their parents have recycling.
Oh my gosh, I do that here.
You do? Okay.
Yeah, I have, so on because I live close, I'm like one of the only ones who lives close in my building. A lot of my friends, I have literally a pile of recycling in my kitchen, and then I bring it to my house because there's little to no places in Village to recycle.
Right.
So,
but it's about that, making it easy for people to do. And so the 34%, like in Buffalo, there's more apartment buildings, than in other parts of the community. So for example, they probably don't have curbside recycling. So all of those things, it's an interesting thing, but it's sad. 2/3 of people don't even think of it.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
And but making it visible. And years ago there was a commercial. I think we talked about it before. Of a person, an anti-littering campaign. It was in the like early 70s.
Definitely, yeah.
And this
you said that to me.
The Native American person is just horrified by how the earth is being destroyed by people's carelessness of littering. And it's not only littering, but it's also taking that nest, except not just throwing it into the wild, but also taking it and making a new use for it through recycling.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's really interesting.
Yeah, it's a fascinating commercial, but again, people still talk about it years later because people don't want to carry that water bottle like a couple of yards to the recycle bin. They want it right near them. And those are the kind of things that's getting people to understand that. So
yeah. Can you speak to using your purchasing power to make the world a better place?
Absolutely. People don't understand the power of their dollar. And I always say that when people make a choice, we call it in the industry, we call it the driveway decision. Where am I going to go? And now it's more like a computer decision. Sometimes,
definitely. You're talking about Amazon.
Oh, yeah. 100%. And people will often, complain that a store is closing or their favorite coffee shop is going out of business. But if they don't patronize it, we're not supporting it. And you're voting with your dollars. Every time you open your wallet, you're deciding who's going to be there. I support my local Wegmans. Wegmans is very good with sustainability. They do a lot of locally sourced produce. They do a lot of really good things. So a lot of times I will pay a little more for Wegmans because I believe in the mission. I love other stores too, but I oftentimes support my local one. I don't go to the big ones. I have a small one near my house in Wasenica, and I love it because it's a little bit smaller, and I make sure I support it because I don't want that to go out of business and then us not have a Wegmans in Wasenica,
right? For
example. And same with like a small bookshop. If it's easier, maybe buy it on Amazon. It might be easier to buy it at Barnes & Noble, but by supporting that small bookstore, it's a good thing to support a local merchant who employs local people, may have make contributions to teams and things like that. So it's very important to really look at who you're supporting, and I believe passionately in that because that's how you decide. Amazon's a very easy decision. You click, and it's not that I have anything. It's a very efficient, very good model, but the reality is as they get bigger, you're going to see costs go up. And because as competition disappears, the incentive to provide the best price to the consumer disappears. Because, like for example, years ago, there was a big complaint against Walmart because Walmart was driving out all the small merchants. And literally Walmart would move into a town, all the small merchants would go. And that's something that realistically is very sad. And they were kind of ruthless with buying power and things like that. They would, we'll go to another vendor, and then they get lower costs and things like that. So it's very important to think with your purchases and to really know who you're buying from. Sometimes Walmart's the easy decision, sometimes Amazon's the easy decision, but is it the best decision? Yeah. Like right now, all the malls are disappearing because people have voted with their dollars that they didn't want to go there. Yeah. And it's kind of sad. You see these giant places that are now being closed, like Eastern Hills and Boulevard, and the mall proper is closed. The outside merchants are still there. But the reality is consumers voted with their dollars that they didn't want that experience anymore. And the merchant also did not provide a fun experience too. They didn't provide a service that was different than an online service. So there's things both, but always vote. I always tell people, you vote with your dollars. And that decides who survives in business. Yeah, we were talking about before when you were saying, is it more efficient for Amazon to bring something to a store? Well, that takes away,
people have to go there to the store then.
Mm-hmm.
It's not delivered to their door. It's the thing about convenience and it being...
Absolutely.
Like you were talking about the bags, too, it being right there. Well, that's why Amazon is so popular. It gets delivered to your door.
Absolutely.
And I don't think that people... I don't know, like... People not necessarily... I think people like the mall, but I don't think they're like, oh, it's not as convenient as, like, getting it delivered. And they don't realize that because they're ordering off of Amazon more, they're voting with their dollar that they don't want to go to the mall now because
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah,
so that's
absolutely.
So interesting.
And and sometimes ordering online is not always efficient. I always tell people never buy shoes and dresses online unless you know that merchant. You know what I mean? Unless you know how they run. Because so often those especially don't always follow traditional sizing. You know what I'm saying? Like, and you know that you've probably had that experience.
Yeah.
Where you order something, it looks great on the the 2-inch image. Exactly. It looks great. Yeah. But then when you actually see it, the fabric might not be to your liking, the fit might not be to your liking. So there's differences.
Yeah.
Sometimes like those two categories are where you get the most returns. That and swimwear. Those are like the three biggies that I always tell people use caution. Sometimes it's so much better to try it on and rather than buy 6 of it and then shipping it back.
Yeah.
And but it's not always convenient to ship it back.
Definitely. And usually a lot of the times they can't use it after you try it on and send it back, right? Like, so then you're just wasting so much, especially if you order 6 dresses, then like
absolutely 5
of them are going to waste.
Yeah, and they probably go to what they call liquidation, where they then end up somewhere down the road. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
As long as the tags are on it, they probably will go to like what they call a liquidator, where it will end up like at a like maybe a Gabe's or something like that, where which is like they buy liquidation stuff.
Yeah, we have a spot near my house. It's called Under One Roof, and they have like the out of season Target, Marshalls, stuff like that. Yeah, it's in Alden.
Oh, I've never heard of that.
Yeah, and they have like good prices and stuff like that.
Right.
So, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that's interesting. I've never heard of that one.
Yeah. So, what are some ways in which you make earth-friendly choices in your life?
Sure. So one of the things, first of all, we already talked about the water bottle. We talked about the, the bags for the grocery store. All those things are important. But also even like, for example, when you select a car, I look at, like right now, electric vehicles are everybody's talking about them. What I would always do, because I would have an hour commute, is I always look for fuel efficiency within a gas model, because the fuel efficiency was huge. So I was able to pick a car that had 30-something miles per gallon, and that was much more eco-friendly and easier on my wallet than even buying a more expensive electronic e-vehicle or whatever. But the reality is that was something that I did. I also grouped my errands together, so I reduce using gas. And I try to keep everything, as far as like at my house, I do composting. I do all of these things to reduce use. I also I'm very list-driven now, which is funny because the pandemic kind of forced it into me, but it makes me a better shopper with less food waste, because now I plan the meals rather than just going to the store and saying, oh, this looks good, or that looks good.
Shopping with your eyes, like, oh my gosh. Or you're shopping when you're hungry.
Oh, 100%. 100%. You spend so much more when you're shopping when you're hungry, because it's like, oh my God, that looks so good. And sometimes the same person that makes that decision to buy it may not be the same person who was set to cook it. Do you know what I'm saying? Because then all of a sudden you're like, oh, I've got to do all these steps, or I got an hour prep work to do, and it's not as appealing, And even like we talk about one of the things like shopping more efficiently, less food waste, composting, making reducing the amount I'm spending as far as like I don't need any more clothes, so I'll shop in my closet. All those small decisions are huge. But even something that we talked about at one of our meetings for the committee, we talked about teaching college kids to cook.
Yeah.
And I learned to cook later in life, and I love it. But it also is so much more environmentally friendly than buying takeout.
Yeah.
Because there's all those plastic containers and all that, that comes in these giant bags and DoorDash or whatever you get.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden you're like, oh, if I could cook, and then you use more vegetables. I cook with more vegetables now than I used to. All these things that are better for the earth that you don't even think about. And many college kids don't know how to cook. And I know I was guilty. I was one of them, raising my hand, because my mom was an amazing cook. So I never really learned to cook until later in life. And sure enough, I love it. But the reality is by decreasing the amount you order from takeout is a huge benefit for the environment. And for your wallet, because takeout is crazy right now, expensive.
Yeah, definitely. So what is your vision for sustainability on our campus?
My vision for sustainability is to, first of all, to hit what I call the low-hanging fruit, and to hit those easy things, like making recycling easy for the dormitories, for the apartment complexes, to make it easy for people to, instead of make it easier to recycle rather than just throw it in the trash, and to reduce the footprint in terms of the recycling. I think that's a huge, easy thing, that when you go to an event, there should be a place to put your recycle pop bottle or beer bottle or whatever, and it should be easy. Mm-hmm. And then that way it doesn't go into the trash.
Yeah.
And I think reducing the amount of trash is an easy first step for it. And then the other thing that I think is a tougher one is to changing a heart, to have a metanoia, to having people actually change their heart with how they approach recycling and green initiatives. So often we try to politicize it as a country. And the reality is I think every person doesn't want a river that's polluted. I think every person does not want to step over garbage or walk on broken beer bottles at the beach. And the reality is we sometimes make it very political, but the reality is we want to be good to the earth because it's good for all of us. Definitely. It's good for animals, it's good for plants, it's good for wildlife, because it's better for the environment. And I think that's the harder thing, because at Canisius University, you're creating the next generation of leaders. Mm-hmm. And by putting it into their mind and their consciousness and make them aware that it's not a thing, oh, you're a tree hugger, you're this. The reality is that everyone wants to be in a park that's clean. Everybody wants to walk on a street where you're not walking past garbage and debris, and all of those things. So it's by making people conscious, and I think that's my ultimate vision for the university.
That's awesome. Is there anything you'd like to add?
Well, first I want to compliment you on all your efforts on your green initiatives. I love looking forward to your emails.
Thank you.
The podcasts have been great, and it's great to learn so much about the different departments and what they're doing. Yeah. And I think you've done a great job, so I want to thank you for that and taking such a leadership role on campus.
Thank you.
And I know you're going to do great things. I'm not sure what you're going to do yet, but I know you're going to do great things, and your passion and your enthusiasm for the earth-friendly initiatives, I think you're going to go be very successful.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate this conversation. I think it's so important for everyone to hear.
Yeah. So appreciate it.